Welcome, welcome, welcome to our first lecture in the DevLab lecture series. With us today, I have my good friend, Asad J, Malik, who is one of my favorite artists working in this crazy industry we're all a part of. Thank you for joining us.
Of course, Renee. Are you getting this echo?
I am not. Do you have headphones on?
Mm-hmm.
I did. Your video feed is a little low resolution-y, so I couldn't tell if that was just like plumes of your hair or headphones that were covering your ears. Are you hearing your own self echoing, or are you hearing me echo?
I'm hearing both of us echo.
Oh, that sounds super obnoxious and distracting. Do you want to try leaving and then coming back?
Okay, sure. I'll give that a shot.
All right, cool. So while Asad's doing that, I will give everyone a rundown of how this is going to work. So Asad has prepared a talk and he's got nice slides and he'll go over them. But I really want people to feel empowered to interrupt whenever you've got a question. So just throw the question in the chat log and I'll keep an eye on that and I'll try to find a moment where I can ask on your behalf. Or if there's an appropriate time, if we start a discussion around something that Asad brought up in his lecture, you can just mention it in the chat log and I'll pull you in and you can actually ask him yourself. Do you still have the echo, buddy?
No, it's good now.
Oh, and your video feed is like crystal clear. I don't know what you did, but this is much better. Okay.
I had two tabs open with the same video.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm realizing I have a bunch of tabs open too, which is a no-no for Crowdcast. It's a very, I've done so much research to find something that does what Crowdcast does, and Crowdcast is kind of the only one that does it, but it's still a little buggy.
As it goes. Let's
get your slides up, and then let's jump in. Already got one question rolling in. I love it. Are you up and running? I'm not sure what that means, David, but maybe. I mean, I'm kind of up and running. I haven't had a cup of coffee or anything. I'm going to put that as a sort of. All right. So we've got your slides. They're really itty bitty. Is this image really itty bitty, Asad?
It should not be.
It wasn't a moment ago. When we move your mouse around a little bit more, like move it to the top of the screen. Yeah, it's weird. It's like
okay. I feel like I know what the solution would be to this too.
All right. There we go. Bingo.
Yeah, is that good?
That's good, man.
Okay, sweet.
Okay, and a little bit of context too. So what this is, why we're calling it the DevLab lecture series. So we have this program called DevLab. That's a content accelerator for immersive films, games, experiences, apps. And we had open submissions a couple of months ago. We closed those submissions and spent a couple of weeks whittling them down to a handful of projects that really just blew our socks off. And we're actually announcing the projects that are going through DevLab later today. I've got an email queued up at the end of this lecture that'll go out. But a lot of the artists that are in the program are here joining us. And these lectures are essentially for them. I mean, the way the program works is that we do group sessions and mentorship throughout the week. And then on Friday, we have these lectures. But we decided that we would allow the broader community to audit these classes because why not? If we got somebody awesome like Asad coming in and sharing his pearls of wisdom, we should share it with the community more broadly. So you're kind of like auditing a class at college. So thank you everyone for coming and being a part of that. And that is the context. All right, are you ready?
I'm not sure if my slides are changing. Are they?
They are changing from a slide to a black square, which is probably not the thing you want them to change into. Are you doing share your entire screen or sharing a tab?
I was just sharing the program, but I can do
yeah. When in doubt, I always do share entire screen because again, it's just the little quirks of the system. And that way we can see your messy screen. Okay, now try going to another slide. It works.
It works. Okay, sweet.
All right. Brilliant.
All right. Okay, so we're gonna start. Yeah, so basically how I imagine doing this is that I'll talk about some of our work, some of the projects that I've done with my studio, and some of the projects that we're working on right now. And hopefully I would do it with a lens that keeps in mind both the content and the thinking around the content, and then also the thinking around the technology and what frameworks we're developing that we think accompany our content well. So that's kind of how I imagine doing this. And I don't think a lot of it would be around production, but that's where you guys can come in and ask questions about how a certain thing was done. I'd be more than happy to jump into that. Yeah, so basically we're starting with this painting that you see from Paul Klee. It's titled Angelus Novus. It's from 1920. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a small passage about it from a critical theorist called Walter Benjamin. So Benjamin writes, a Klee painting named Angelus Novus shows an angel looking as though he's about to move away from something he is fixedly contemplating. His eyes are staring, his mouth is open, his wings are spread. This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned towards the past. Where we perceive a chain of events, he sees one single catastrophe, which keeps piling wreckage upon wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing from paradise. It has got caught in his wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. The storm is what we call progress. So it's a rather bleak description of progress, and especially in our industry where we think of progress and technology and moving forward as very optimistically, I think it's good to sometimes have a slightly more cautious approach. How Benjamin basically describes this painting and the angel is with his back turned, with his back pointed towards the future rather than looking in front of it. And the past or the history is just a pile of debris that's constantly growing. And the future we're going into is not decided by the concrete decisions we're making, but by the storm that's just pushing us forward. So basically, my studio is called OneRig, and we are an augmented reality studio. We opened recently in Los Angeles. We have a space over here that we're working out of. And one of the things we intend to do with our work is to give the angel of history a moment to breathe. We want to basically look at this technology, slow down, and really consider what can be done with it, how things can be affected with it, rather than just following or being pushed by both the powers of the market and the powers of history and how the world is currently structured. So rather than repeating what has happened in the past, thinking very consciously about where this technology can lead us. So that's a huge part of the content that we like to create. So there are two angles to this. There is an element of challenging technology at any given moment, thinking about, are we really pushing the technology to its limits? Are we really working with the most emerging cutting edge tools that are available to us? And then challenging stories in terms of stories that challenge people, but stories that are also challenging to tell. So these are the two things that we try to think of as much as possible with the projects that we're doing. And basically, this is our beautiful office setup that we just moved in here 2 months ago, I think. This is where I'm sitting right now, and we have a small team. This is all the members of OneRig that have been with us in the past and are still with us. And we're starting to basically crystallize more and more over time what our projects are and what processes we use to build them. So now talking about the technology side, the work that OneRig does is around these 4 basic elements. We think of ourselves as really an augmented reality studio. We've not done a VR project so far. I'm not saying that we will never do a VR project, but we really do specialize in AR and certain unique characteristics of AR that basically are only available in this medium. Then we really like to work with volumetrically scanned people. This is something that I'll hopefully get more into in a moment, but this is really core to our work. And we have made a very conscious decision to choose volumetrically scanned people rather than rigged or motion capture kind of animations. And almost all of our project includes some element of voice interactivity and kind of finding your own agency as a viewer and being able to speak to a character. And the fourth element is branching narrative. So all of these four elements coming together, essentially you get a human sitting in space that you can talk to and have a conversation with that flows over time. It's not, you can't say infinite things to it. It's limited to what was actually recorded, but that becomes an advantage, which we can also get into. Renee, can you still see my slides? Because
oh yeah, I'm seeing it.
Everything's working, right? Okay, great.
And I know you don't want to just drone on, and not that you're droning on at all, but I do want to interrupt you just to let you know that you are being watched, because it's weird when you give these screencasts and it just feels like you're talking into the abyss. But this is fantastic.
Exactly. I don't want to talk for a few minutes and not feel like I'm just talking to myself.
I don't know. I just didn't want to interrupt you because they're so fascinating. So
okay, sweet, good.
Keep going.
So this what I just brought up. This is one of the branching narratives for an experience that we're currently working on. This is a more simple one, so it can be put visually into this small, beautiful little thing. So I thought I would show you. But basically, the idea around these conversations that we develop is that they're narrow. They're not, you can't ask everything you ever wanted, but hopefully by the context that we set for you, it becomes obvious what questions you can and cannot ask. And the advantage that we've seen with this kind of methodology is that things don't feel too open-ended. They feel more narrative-driven. So on a micro level, the viewer has agency quite frequently. There are 2 questions at any given moment you can choose, and out of the 2 questions, you lead to different pathways that you may not have led to. But on an overall macro level, we maintain a narrative arc. So frequently, the different conversation lines that you might go into would come and converge at a climax moment, and you would have touched on all the important topics we wanted you to touch on. And overall, you would have had a similar experience to everyone else who would have had this conversation, versus doing a more open-ended situation where you ask one question and it doesn't quite connect to the next question you're going to ask. And hence, it feels like just a thing you can open-endedly ask questions to, rather than feeling like a very impactful one, like this important conversation that you had. So that's just giving you guys a sense of that. All this started with Terminal 3, which was a project that we had at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2018. This is where this thinking around branching narrative-based work and voice interactive work with volumetrically captured holograms came from. In fact, I remember very clearly like sitting with Renee at Sundance in 2017. And at that time, we were in conversation with Lauren, trying to convince him to have Terminal 3 at Tribeca. And we were throwing these ideas around, and Renee was a very crucial part of being like, hey, like, why don't we have you interrogating the person and do this kind of interactive thing, and your voice and the questions you ask should influence it. And yeah, we doubled down on that. And when we showed this at Tribeca, it was just really worked out. People were really engaged by the material, although we were working with DepthKit for volumetrically captured, so it's very accessible. And we were, using the built-in HoloLens Microsoft speech to text that was really effective as well. So for those of you who don't know about Terminal 3, essentially the idea was that you would go into a small room at the Tribeca Film Festival wearing a HoloLens, and you would see this kind of abstracted version of a hologram in front of you. And we had captured these holograms with DepthKit, and you would see these lines forming up the subject. And the installation, you'd be able to ask them questions as I was describing earlier. And you were supposed to be an airport interrogator. So as you ask questions, slowly the hologram started to appear more and more realistic. And towards the end, once you had interrogated them completely, it would tell you to go into the second room and let the hologram know whether you're letting them into the country or not. And when you walked into the second room, we had the real person whose hologram we had made actually sitting in the second room waiting to hear from you. And that moment was also incredibly powerful for a lot of people. This kind of juxtaposition of virtual presence with real presence ended up being very effective. So out of this came a lot of these tools that we ended up working with further for other projects as well.
This would be a good time for me to jump in and embarrass.
Sure.
So this project really started much earlier than that conversation with Lauren. I think it crystallized when we were pitching it at Sundance. But it started even earlier. It started in like early 2017, when the project had the most egocentric title ever, which was your name, Asad and Asad, making a connection between the Syrian dictator asshole and you, and how one letter could make the difference. And the project was very different back then. But I remember meeting you for the first time at our marketplace event, First Look. You were still in college, I think, at the time, and you just showed up with all of these amazingly talented kids from Bennington College. And I was so impressed. I think in a lot of ways made First Look as special as it was, just because you were really the first artist that I knew that were doing interesting things with AR. A lot of people were meddling with it, but I felt like you were the first artist that was doing work of real substance that worked. And since we're actually doing First Look in a month, maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience going through First Look and how that helped you get to the place where you could premiere this project at Tribeca.
For sure. Actually, last night I was at a film festival opening in Hollywood, and a bunch of VR people were there, and they were like, "Oh, you're doing the kaleidoscope thing in the morning," and I'm like, "Cool," like the people are really paying attention to these conversations you're having, Renee, and that was still the case like in 2017, because how it happened for me was I was in school building a bunch of projects on the HoloLens, just sitting in my dorm room and publishing them and getting a bunch of press around those projects. And basically I started getting people, reaching out to me and whatnot, but it was Hussein from Sundance. He was working at Sundance at that time. Hussein really reached out to me, and he's like, the work you're doing could end up in a major film festival, and I want you to think of it that way and develop it that way. And I'm like, okay, well, I've been doing all this stuff for free just on my own. Maybe that would be an excuse to raise some money and like build a project where everyone gets paid. And he's like, okay, let me connect you to Renee. And Hussein connected me to Renee. Renee and I had a conversation. I'm like, Renee, I want to get like $20,000 for this project I'm doing. And Renee's like, no one gives anyone $20,000. If you're going to have people look at this as a proper project, at least you need like 60,000. And I was like, whoa, that's a lot of money. And Renee was like, come to the First Look event and present. It's in a couple of weeks. And I flew back to Vermont before school had started, called up a bunch of friends, and I'm like, hey, we have this big opportunity. We're going to Sundance. And everyone's like, what do you mean we're going to Sundance? This is way before we actually went to Sundance. I was just like, no, it's happening. And we're going to go to this event. We're going to raise the money, and we're going to go to Sundance. And in 2 weeks, we produced, for the first time, I met the Depth Kit people in New York during that week. They were so helpful, James and everyone. They let me use the license for free because we couldn't pay for it at that time. And in 2 weeks, we found a studio in our college, found some people, some freshman students that had just traveled from Muslim countries as protagonists. And in 2 weeks, we built like this interactive 3-person, like 3 volumetrically captured holograms that you can engage with the HoloLens in like 2 or 3 weeks, and brought it to First Look. And I did a presentation about it, and then there was a lot of interest from people in the industry, and I got introduced to a lot of people, like, for example, Jake. I met Jake at First Look, Jake Sally from Riot, who has just been, a huge collaborator since, and we do a lot of projects together to this day. So First Look was really absolutely crucial for me to get my foot in the industry.
Well, and I love that you hustled and got the demo done in 2 weeks. So the artists that are on the line are going to be presenting at First Look. You've got 4.5 weeks, so you've got an eternity of time. So no excuses. And anyone else that's on the line and thinking about attending First Look, there's a little button flashing on the bottom of your screen. Please click it and apply to attend. It's going to be an amazing event. But please continue. I wanted to. In some ways, you're sort of like one of my favorite examples of a project that came out of that whole program, just because you were so early, but then you were able to achieve quite a lot from that starting point.
Yeah, and I mean, like, that whole event meant a lot. And then, Renee got in touch with us, and he was like, "Hey, you're one of the few projects we're going to actually executive produce." And we were absolutely thrilled. And that whole partnership with Kaleidoscope around Terminal 3 was huge. I mean, just that pitch to Lauren at Tribeca was like such an important moment in order to get this going and get everything ready and done. And I remember Anita and the three of us sat down, we came up with all these new elements we were adding to the project.
Like 30 minutes before we pitched to Lauren,
30
right?
minutes. Exactly. In 30 minutes, it became like from Asad and Asad to Terminal 3 to this like interactive.
Yeah, we changed the name. We changed like the key things. One of the amazing elements was that there's the people that you're interrogating are, physically present there. And that was like a whole thing. And you're like, oh, we're going to build it. That almost every project happens that way. That I feel like there's that moment where it crystallizes.
For sure. And I remember you saying, oh, we can have a one-way mirror. And to myself in my heart, I thought, I'm like, oh, that's not happening. It's absolutely unnecessary. But I'll just say yes for now. And then look at this picture with a huge one-way mirror.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hold on.
When we were displaying this at the Barbican.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I don't want to derail your presentation, so keep going.
Sure. So yeah, I'm going to just switch topics slightly. I think it's helpful as we transition to the next project that I was hoping to talk about. Basically, this is like a famous moment. Everyone knows. I feel like maybe people have heard of this. There was a radio play called The War of the Worlds that aired on the radio in 1938. And what was interesting was that it was disguised as a news program that was describing an alien invasion into the real world. And people freaked out. People thought aliens were actually coming. And, there was widespread panic. What is less known or less thought about maybe, which is really interesting to me, is the role that ads played in this moment. The reason people switch around radio channels or TV channels for that matter is because they're trying to avoid ads. And when you avoid ads, you end up on a radio play that has already started and you missed the disclaimer telling you this is not real. And now you think this is actually happening. And then the other thing is the lack of ads in the radio program itself makes you think this is real. So it was because of ads that people switched, and then it was the lack of ads that allowed people to think it's real. So I feel like this, like how important ads are to make you feel whether something is real or not, is a very interesting thought. And especially as we go into a more, like where media is part of reality, that starts to become more and more important. And as a studio that might be doing work that may be commercial or might be working with brands, I think those things are very important to think about. The reason I bring it up is because we're seeing a lot of this, these AI or virtual characters as they're put out, virtual beings, as a lot of people are talking about them right now. Sophia the robot from Hanson Robotics and Lil Michaela, for example, the virtual influencer on Instagram. I find this space very interesting right now because I think it's very problematic as well. I think the idea of what AI is really misrepresented at the moment. Like Lil Michaela is presented as a robot, and the Sophia the robot is also presented as a robot that has AI and can think, which is not the case at all. Both of these characters are basically how we build our virtual characters as well. You have a team of writers, they write branching narratives, they build a persona around them. That's it. There can be AI-based things like, for example, simply speech to text is AI-based, but that doesn't mean these characters are AI. So especially Sophia the robot, I find it hugely problematic because it messes up people's perception of what AI is. and already people don't know what it is. So it's going to lead to a lot of issues in the future, in my opinion. So we had a project this year that premiered at the Sundance Film Festival called A Jester's Tale, that was kind of playing with these ideas of what is real, what is not, who's robot, what's AI. And how we were doing it was that we had this project that was showing on the Magic Leap, and you would enter a child's bedroom. And it was a fully decked out bedroom, and the experience just wouldn't start. When you tried to start it, it would take you to a CAPTCHA page and would say, are you a robot? You would have to show it a thumbs up. You would have to do all these engagements with it. But slowly these CAPTCHA tests would start to become more and more complicated, and eventually it would just become the experience. Then you had characters, that this little boy on the bed that was sitting and talking to you, and you had a back and forth with the little boy, and he was asking you questions and trying to confuse you. And at the end of the day, it became this kind of absurdist reverse Turing test in which the boy and the whole experience was an AI trying to figure out whether or not you're a real person. And how we did that was that we actually worked with MetaStage on the volumetrics. We captured, this is Poppy, who is a YouTuber and a pop star who is actually known to be kind of this robot person, or a lot of people online are, having YouTube debates about whether she's real or not. So we thought she was a great person to bring on. She played the role of the Rat Queen in A Jester's Tale. And basically then we had this child that we also recorded at MetaStage. I'm just going to derail slightly for a moment and just say that recording the child was a really interesting moment. You are a 9-year-old kid, you're put in this huge volumetric recording stage, and now you have to somehow connect to a viewer that isn't there. So in this moment, we actually got to experiment, and we came up with this idea of having what we called an interactor. So we had another person on stage pretending to be the viewer interacting with the child that we then removed in post, but that allowed the kid to have a much more realistic performance and find a connection with the viewer that was a lot more powerful. But anyway, going forward, basically what happens during the experience is that you're forced to kill this rat, and the child kind of tricks you into doing that. There's this rat cage on the bed, you have to open it with a key, and it gets really absurd. Then there's a rat queen, and she wants to take revenge, and the final decision you're left with is you have to decide whether or not you're going to kill yourself or sacrifice the child in order to satisfy the rats. And in this moment, learning from Terminal 3, we actually had a real kid in the wall with a sliding door sitting behind. So in the last moment, there would be a real kid, and to the real kid's face, you would have to make this final decision.
I remember the first time you told me the idea for this project, I thought you were joking. I thought this was like an idea that you were like just making up as you were talking to me just to pull my leg. And then I was like, oh, you're serious. Especially because originally the kid was going to be stuffed under the bed. And you're like, no, he'll just be like in a hidden compartment. I was like, dude, you know, it like runs for like 10 hours a day. How are you going to have a kid under a bed?
Yeah, we ran into a lot of legal issues. So, I mean, now I know a lot about child labor laws in Utah, if anyone needs any help with that ever. But basically, you can have a kid working up to 3 hours at a time. So we had to find 3 doppelgangers for this kid. And we had to basically cast them in Utah in Park Cities or nearby areas so we could have them over. So yeah, there were 3 different kids playing this role, sitting in a cage all day. So yeah, it was pretty crazy. Honestly, I can't believe we managed to raise money for it and actually do it. Take it to a festival. It was pretty absurd. But yeah, what was so interesting about that moment was that I was really surprised by the kind of responses we got at the end. So for example, we had around 80% of women say they want to sacrifice themselves rather than the child. And we had around 80% men say they want to sacrifice the child instead of them. And that was really bizarre. I was not expecting any like figures that would be that dramatic. For me, the dichotomy was between being human versus being AI. But then it became about, all the dichotomies of what being human is to begin with. And we saw a bunch of racial ideas thrown around, like someone saying, oh, if this person was the same race myself, I would have thought differently. And it was a really like kind of stunning moment where you can't do this stuff with real people, but you can with holograms, and the kind of results you get are really bizarre. So anyway, out of these things, I just wanted to quickly touch upon some of the key ideas that came out of these things, of what we just discussed. So by having it be AR, there's a certain contextual awareness around your space that comes into play. And I find this is probably the key thing, this idea of the ghostly presence, as I like to call it, where it's a very modernist idea to have real people captured and shown them in real spaces, or even in VR, the kind of people striving for realism, or photogrammetry and throwing volumetrics onto photogrammetry, trying to get as close to the real world as possible in VR. It's a very modernist like idea of like representation. What a very postmodernist idea here is the work that happens when the hologram is not in the space anymore, which I find absolutely interesting. So you place a hologram in a room, you watch it through a headset or your device or a phone, and then you take the device away and you come back to that room later. The presence of the hologram is still left behind here. The room has forever been changed by the fact that this hologram was here once. And I find that very interesting, and that's something that a lot of our work tries to capture. Then what I was saying about interactivity, this kind of maintaining an illusion of choice on a micro level, but having a dramatic arc on a macro level, I feel has been a very important thing with building interactive narratives, right? Like the question of how much agency you give the viewer versus, as a director, how much agency you have for yourself is really crucial. And then this idea of juxtaposing real presence with virtual presence, we've done it with 2 projects now where the hologram becomes real at the end. And how do you deal with that? And what happens psychologically to you when that moment takes place? So with Terminal 3, I really saw that when viewers saw the real person, suddenly everything that happened before was looked at with a different perspective. The hologram also becomes real in that moment. And then this idea of playing with levels of visual abstraction and basically how realism can be juxtaposed and played around with abstraction and shaders and whatnot. That has played an important role over time of conveying narratives. So in Terminal 3, once again, the fact that they're really abstracted and made up of lines at the start echoes to how Muslim bodies are scanned in airports with the similar technology. But over time, as you ask the questions, it starts appearing more and more realistic, and that becomes part of the narrative. All right, so that's some of the work that we've done. I'm happy to talk about any of this if anyone has any questions or something's happening. Otherwise, I'm happy to give a quick sense of the slate of projects we're working on right now. And I can move ahead from that. What do you think, Renee?
Let's ask a few questions and then let's dive into the projects just to break it up a bit.
Sure.
So we've got one from Claire. She's asking, can holograms be animated with lip sync? So I'm guessing, can you do like some sort of base level capture in volumetric and then animate the facial lip syncing to get them to say different things?
Sure. So yeah, definitely. I mean, at that point, the volumetric video is not that important anymore. It's the same as doing a photogrammetry model of someone and then rigging it up. You can rig it up to as much detail as the money you have, I suppose. But our work is not, we don't try to do generative work like that. It's very much about what was captured. And this is also something I feel like I can talk about in a moment in one of the slides. But volumetrics are really important for us because of that reason, because it conveys to the viewer that this event took place. In this time of fake news and, virtuality in general, it's really important for us to ground our AR work in reality. So the fact that we can say this subject actually said these things and was captured, now you're engaging with that material, is more powerful than saying, oh, look, we used the material we captured to generate this new thing. So what we're doing now, for example, with the holograms we're capturing with Metastage, which are incredibly realistic. I can't begin to describe the new results we're getting with some of our new projects. We've played with lighting, we've played lighting to match skin tone, we've moved the cameras closer, we're getting incredibly realistic holograms. And then we're able to do head retargeting. So as the hologram is speaking, they can actually follow your gaze and look at you. which adds a whole new level of connection with the viewer. So that's the amount of kind of manipulation that we're okay with in terms of our volumetrics.
Interesting. I love the diagram that you had for branching narratives, and I want to talk about that for a minute. But
Sure.
Andrew asked a quick question about what you were using to capture with. The original project was captured using Depth Kit or Terminal 3 rather, and then your last project, and I think your current projects are using Metastage.
Initially it was Depth Kit for Terminal 3, Metastage for Jester's Tale, Metastage for Career Day, which is one of the projects we're working on. But we're still hoping and are continuing to experiment more with Depth Kit. I think there's something about the accessibility and how easy it is to deploy that as well. How it's not as expensive as Metastage, which is very expensive. So I definitely hope to still do more with Depth Kit in a more like iteration, quicker things going out from the studio level.
Cool, thank you. So on the branching side, how do you? So you had that beautiful diagram. I've never seen a diagram before that. I've never actually intimately worked on a branching narrative project where I had to actually figure that shit out. So like in terms of the mechanics of and the math and the structure, like can you go into a little bit more detail for someone that's thinking about employing that? Like it just seems like for me, I would just have a wall filled with sticky notes and slowly go crazy.
I have that too. I can show you. I don't know how well the camera is working, but there is also a wall of sticky notes here.
Oh, brilliant. That's one of your branching narratives right there?
Yeah. That's so I can walk you through the process of how we achieve it usually. So we have an interview, which we like for it to be around 3 to 4 hours. That's usually a good time to get comfortable, to talk casually about things and get into the nitty-gritty of content. But we can also do it very quickly. So recently we were working with a high-profile talent that we had very limited time with, and we were able to get material in 40 minutes. So we have 40 minutes worth of material that we cut out everything that's unnecessary. We left with roughly 20 minutes or something of material that is actually then rendered out. This is all divided into small clips that are just quick responses. I like to include moments when someone's thinking or moments when someone stutters over a word. Like those, they help portray the realness of the moment. We like for it to not be scripted. When the talent asks for exact questions, we always give them themes instead. So we take all these clips, render them out, and then we organize them in terms of themes and topics. And we say, we really do want to make sure the viewer goes through at least one clip about their family life.
Yeah.
So we like to put, we would put a clip of family life and something else. And if you didn't go to family life, we will bring back family life later. So we make sure you touch upon it. So we usually work in this order of priority. Certain things you have to go through. Certain things we try for you to go through more than others by giving them to you multiple times. And certain things, they're not that important. If you go through them, it's good. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter.
So you have like a main spine that you sort
exactly.
of like these things are essential, and then these other paths are like interesting but not.
And sometimes you have different responses that will touch upon something similar. So for example, if you have someone talking about their sister and someone talking about their mother, if you didn't see the sister, we would want to make sure you see the mother, because that's the part about their family. So like things like that. And then usually there's always one clip, and you know it when you do the interview. You hit a moment with the person where they just end up saying something that really resonates or something that really connects to them, and it just comes through. With every interview it happens. And that moment, which, as I said, you just know it, that moment becomes a climax, and we place it to the end. And we try everything else to lead up to that moment. So that's kind of how we do a lot of the arrangement. And then from that, we ease you out into kind of an ending moment where the experience ends. But that's generally how we organize the structure of the experience. And then there's a looping clip in the middle of every clip that plays in order while the hologram's waiting for your response. And we usually have multiple looping clips that we trigger depending on what the frames look like of the clip you just watched, so we can match it up as much as possible. Sometimes we're able to match it perfectly. You can go and post and change the OBJ sequences to seamlessly transition them into loops. And for more higher-end projects, we're able to do that as well. So that's kind of how we think of the narrative. In 10 minutes, you should be able to have this conversation, and you should have as much of as an epiphany as anyone else. But when you're talking to someone else who did the experience, you should run into things that you saw that they didn't.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
Got a question from Will. Asad, you've used voice to interact in your previous work. Do you see a merging of physical interactions with holograms juxtaposed with physical persons in the future, even in small ways, i.e. light touch or say a high five?
You mean high-fiving the hologram, right? If I understood that correctly. Like,
I'll let Will answer
moments
that.
in which you're engaging with the actual hologram in that sense.
And then, I'm a little confused about that too, because it seems like that would make sense in a virtual setting where you're in VR and there's a physical component that you interact with. But in a hologram, like high-fiving seems hard.
So, for example, one of the things we did with the Jester still, which was hugely successful and I was very, very pleased with, was the key. So while you're talking to the child is asking all these questions, and in the questions, we're getting certain responses from you, and we're getting you closer to giving the response we want you to give, which is key. So it talks about your mom, and your mom forgot something, and what did you forget? And you come up with key. And it feels like you came up with word, but actually we kind of pushed you to that direction. But when you say key, we say the hologram tells you to open this drawer and see what you find. And you find a physical key in there, and you take it. And later in the experience, you use that key to open the virtual cage, the rat cage. And you have to take the physical key, touch it to the lock, and spin it, and lock opens, and the rats come out. That was a really successful moment in which a virtual and physical interaction kind of blending together added a whole new layer to the experience. I think it's harder to achieve a lot of times with holograms because you need at least some sense of reaction or touch with them. So we're not quite doing that as of now, but I can see how that can happen. Like I can see that already when, for example, while we're debugging and we have a very realistic, photorealistic hologram, we're watching it through the HoloLens 2 or something, a device which is, a decent field of view. You can really get immersed in it. And in order to place the hologram somewhere, you actually have to grab it with your hands and put it somewhere. And there's something about that in this case which feels really off, and you feel like you're definitely intruding someone's personal space by grabbing someone and placing them somewhere. And I think that's definitely rich material to do things with in the future.
Awesome. I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to ask questions.
Sure.
But since it seems like people are being a little shy, I'm just selflessly curious to know about the projects you guys have in your slate. Can we pull that up?
Okay, so I can just quickly go through that. I want to basically show you guys that, we did these two projects that were very intellectual and kind of, had all these things happening to them that were subtle and not subtle. And, we don't put it out for everyone. This is not material that's going to be on the top whatever charts. So I just wanted to show that at this point, we're really functioning as an AR studio that is experimenting with all kinds of mediums and verticals and all kinds of partners. And we're really exploring what we can do. So for example, a very different project we did recently, which premiered this week at SEMA, which is an auto show. I don't know much about the car world, but I suppose it's been happening recently since moving to LA. But basically, our next door neighbors is this production company that focuses on building just really insane modded cars. So they had this Porsche 935, which is a racing car from the 70s, and they modernized it and painted it and took it to this auto show. And we built this kind of AR experience around it where you can look at the car through your iPad, and this magic window-like experience where there's a retrowave universe that is very reminiscent of that time from the 80s and this car's history with the Kraftwerk-inspired track playing. And it was just like a fun, quick side project that we did that went to this conference and was just hugely successful there. Because there are all these cars, but everyone's focused on this one because it comes with a virtual world. So I think it's very interesting engaging with different verticals. And for example, the automotive industry always does training-based things in AR, or it shows the car's insights, always very utilitarian. So working on something that artistically raises the legacy of a certain object, I think was very much in line with what we do with people. A big project we're working on right now is called Corellia, which we're going to deploy these two projects, Corellia and Career Day, are going to be deployed in around 200 schools across the country, especially schools that serve basically like underprivileged populations, students that are on lunch programs that can't afford lunches based on their parents' salaries. Will be able to get to experience some of these AR projects that we're working on. So Aurelia is this experience where your classroom fills up with water and you learn about what the properties of this water are. So the nutrient supply there, the amount of temperature, the light, whatnot. And based on that, you learn about what kind of fish lives in that water and you design your own fish. So you give it a certain tail, you give it a certain mouth structure, and you give it a certain color. And by these decisions, we see how the fish will survive in that water. And at the end, you kind of let your fish into the water and you're able to go see your classmates' fish and basically see how long it can live. And that becomes the test. And there are multiple levels and multiple ecosystems you can go through. And this is a good example of like a very different experience we're working with that doesn't really engage the kind of stuff we usually do. But what we're trying to bring to the table here is really very carefully look at the academic standards and curriculum standards of the country, and especially the future curriculum standards, and build something that's not just a novelty experience, that really ends up teaching the curriculum as it exists in the textbooks to help teachers like do it in this more interactive way. So that's one of the projects we're working on.
Cool.
Career Day is a very Terminal 3 inspired structure where we're capturing very realistic holograms this time of people who are leaders or working in different industries and careers. And we're going to take these to these high schools as well, where kids can wear HoloLens to and talk to a product designer at Snapchat or Instagram and learn about how those things were built, or talk to an athlete or a musician and learn about these careers and get a more intimate sense from people that otherwise they won't have access to. And Jadu is essentially is the code name we have for our internal work that we're doing around building tools. So for example, we were talking about branching narratives. We've been building Unity plugins and things like that we're not thinking of productizing as such, but it's hugely helpful because the material we use to build in a month, we can build in a few hours by the tools we built for ourselves internally. And we're starting to, under Jadu, really explore what we can do with our structure of volumetrically captured branching narratives and what verticals it can work with, how we can, use it to better serve the kind of angel of history I was describing earlier as well.
Awesome, man. That's so exciting. I love all of these projects. Really excited about Career Day. When does that launch, and will that be available outside of those schools?
Currently, we don't have it launched yet as such. The production timeline for both these projects is the same 6 months, so that we're focusing a lot on it. But the nice thing is that we already have a hologram that's almost done, and then we have 5 other production days with MetaStage over the next couple of months. But in a few months, I think the first one we should be able to put out, or at least announce, and it will first go to the schools, but we might do a festival before that just to show it to the industry. But I can't say anything definitively on that, but we definitely want to bring it out and make it as accessible as possible.
Cool.
Yeah.
We got a couple questions.
Sure.
Got one from Mateo. Are you working with any immersive theater companies? Could your approach lead to multiple users living the experience in different ways?
We're not working with any theater companies as such. However, we have engaged with theater a lot while developing our projects. We had a theater director help out with work on A Jester's Tale while we were figuring out how the kids' performance would be. Like, we were quite worried about the kids' performance, honestly. We weren't getting the results we needed, and the timelines was short. So we had a lot of help from that director. But I don't have any plans as such. We're not working on a project as such with a theater company as of now. Larger scale projects like that, where there are multiple actors engaging with something, is a next step that we've not taken yet. I'm visiting the Intel Volumetric Studio next week, so I'm curious to see like what it means to shoot at such a big capture area, and
it's pretty rad.
I want to see how that would change the work we do, or if there's a possibility for a project there. But I think thinking of theater around those lines is definitely cool. Yeah.
Got a quick question from Andrew, and then a really interesting one from Taylor.
Sure.
So from Andrew, I think boil it down to, have you investigated the comparison of user response of 360 video versus AR?
Have I done a study and published a paper on it? No. But have I seen people in festivals and people I show work to, including 360 videos and AR? I think that there is definitely a big difference. One of the things, and this is not necessarily a difference only between AR and 360. I feel like all of us can point out a lot of clear differences between AR and 360 that are more obvious, but some that are a bit less obvious are things like, when you make a 360 film, you use a lot of film language in order to make it. You have a dissolve, or you switch from a scene to another scene, you do perspective, you do all these things that have developed in the tradition of film. With AR, you can do the same thing, but we don't. A lot of people say this to us, like, oh, there's a hologram, you're talking to the hologram, they're talking about their trip to a certain place or what they did when they were a kid. Why can you also not have, like, on the side, that trip or like an illustration or animation of them as kids, or just like cut them out for a moment and show what that world looked like with a voiceover. And I think that actually kills what we do best, which is building a connection with this hologram and maintaining this illusion that in some weird way they're actually there. By cutting it and switching and using film language, you totally take someone out of that moment. So I feel like that's one of the major differences with 360, where 360 is never about like introducing something to you as real in your world, which is how we like to deal with our characters. That makes sense. Yeah.
Nice. Let's dig into this one from Taylor, because I think this is a great question.
Sure.
Can you talk about, just in a general way, can you talk about rejection and the pitching process? Yeah. Like, how often do you face rejection? How do you handle it? What are your thoughts about the mountain you have to climb to get a project funded?
Sure. Here's the thing. I see this all the time around me, right? Like, people are working on projects, they're trying to raise money, it's not happening for years sometimes. There is a project that I was advising that was raising money like 6-7 months ago. They're still raising money and they've not built anything since. Basically what I'm trying to say is that I never had that feeling. The reason I never had that feeling was because I had to do a lot of projects on my own without any money. Like, I was just building so many things just out of my dorm room, out of money. I won a hackathon and bought this headset, that the fact that I could raise money for a project was very brand new when we started working on Terminal 3. So when we presented at first look, there were a lot of leads, but nothing was really happening. No one was actually giving us money. But I knew to myself that this didn't mean we stopped production. We're already working. We're already making the thing. I have my friends. We're all working together. We're going to make this happen regardless of whether we get money or not. But we were confident that we're going to make it good. It's going to go to a festival and we'll get money because of that. At that time, I remember with Renee, we were engaging a lot of potential funders. It wasn't happening. I realized that no one's willing to write us a big check. It's too much of a risk, or they don't know if it will pay off. But there are a lot of supporters. There are a lot of people who are willing to give us some money. So that became a moment where I was like, okay, we can do a Kickstarter campaign around this. It feels like there are hundreds of people that have funds that are willing to engage with us. After the first look event, there were literally a couple hundred people there that were all into the project. So I was like, I have enough out there to raise $20,000 out of this community. So with that in mind, we built our Kickstarter project that we had some people that wanted to produce a project but weren't like totally down to commit completely. But what they said was, like, for example, Anita said that she would put down $5,000 on day one of the Kickstarter if we do it. And in return, we gave her credit, and that was just hugely helpful. We knew that the project would be successful before we even put it out. So when we put out the Kickstarter and we got 50% funded on day one, because the community was ready for it already. We had the rest of the month to engage new people and raised 20,000. And that gave us enough to complete the project and get into Tribeca. And when we got into Tribeca, by that time, we had built relationships with Riot and Unity and a bunch of other people that came in to complete the gap. We ended up raising, what, over 100,000, 150,000 or something for that project. It was done. It was already done. When the money came in, I paid everyone back, but we had built it and we had all taken it to a festival already. So like that was always the thinking, that this is happening, it's happening on the same timeline no matter what. And it's different because we were in school and we didn't have to pay rent. It was a different kind of scenario. So I'm not saying that that's how it is for everyone, but I really will insist that the amount of effort it takes to get meetings, the amount of effort it takes to interest people in your work, a lot less effort goes into sitting with Unity for 2 weeks and building a strong demo, or like building something that you can already pitch to a festival, or already show to a small audience, or do a small press thing around it. I think it takes a lot less effort than raising money. And when people spend months raising money, I really wish that they just spend the same time learning Unity. Because sure, I did have programming experience before I started doing Unity 3-4 years ago, but I've had people on the team, for example, Jack has been with me throughout. He was on Terminal 3, he's still here. He's taking a lead on our technical development at this point. He had some CS experience from college, but he came in as a sound designer. But over time, he took on Unity so much, and I was guiding him throughout, that now he's really good at it and has been taking a lead on a lot of our work. So I'm just saying people can do a lot on their own without raising money, and especially the first couple of projects, the first couple of demos, I would really recommend pushing for it. And I know you asked about a Jester's Tale specifically. I would just say that money came before the project for a Jester's Tale, which was a very unique moment. But Terminal 3 did so well that Riot told us they had some money allocated for another AR project, and if I wanted to take that on, and I took it on, and then it ended up becoming a Jester's Tale. But it wasn't like I wasn't running around with the concept trying to get it raised, which was really like I'm thankful that things happen for me that way, and I know that it doesn't always work out like that.
So many great things to unpack there. I think one is momentum and the importance of momentum, and the fact that like you just have to keep pushing the project, the actual project, not just the fundraising side, forward and making it better. And that once you hit some critical mass there, you will have the support that you need. Absolutely. And not relying on anybody else, like actually like focusing on projects that you can meaningfully make headway on yourself or just with the collaborators that you have. Also, I think Kickstarter is fantastic for projects that are in that 20,000 budget range. When people ask me about like funding, it's like, if you're in that range, I mean, Kickstarter is great. If you're trying to raise $10,000, $20,000, there's not really a much better tool out there, because you should be able to, if you can't reach enough people to support your project at that level, then it means that it's, there's something else going on that's not quite right. Awesome. A couple other questions. Mm-hmm. We've got one from looks like Tahir. He asked a question, but then he amended his question. It's rather long. Better question. There appears to be two major branches of experience creation right now. Activity immersions like flooding classrooms and building solar systems, and surrogacy immersion, where you role play in a given scenario, like our project Everyday Seems Like Murder Here, which is one of the projects that got accepted into the DevLab program. And your Terminal 3. What's a midpoint? What are we not thinking about to make that possible? You have choose your own adventure on one hand and sandbox on the other. How can we do emergent narrative that isn't so dependent on educating the player first and isn't dependent on writing the rules of a universe?
Sure. I would not say Corellia is not a sandbox at all. It's 3 very concrete levels. The thing with, I've been learning a lot about fish recently. We have an academic advisor here, and she loves fish, and she's a marine biologist. And she keeps talking about all the things that we need to know and all the things we also don't need to know. But basically, with Corellia, we're building 3 different worlds, and with how it goes with the ocean is that either you have a certain set of properties and you're a certain biome or ecosystem, or you're not. There is not that much of a middle ground. So what that means is there is already a built-in narrative. Kids have to build very, very specific types of fish in order for them to survive in a certain given level, and ends up being very limited in that sense. So, and we're making this for 9-year-olds, so we're even limiting it further and making it very simple that they build something. And if they added, if they made their fish small and they're going to put it at the top of the ocean, they can't make it red because then it's going to get eaten, But by doing that, we teach them the concept. So that's kind of how we think of it. We don't do that many things that are that open-ended. That balance, as you described, between how much agency the viewer has and how much you as a creative have is quite important. And we definitely lean more towards the creator's agency. And the agency we give the viewer is usually, at least to a certain extent, an illusion, or just like trying to teach a concept or trying to get an idea across. But overall, from the top view, it's always about what, as a director, you're putting it into it, like the overall agency. I hope that answers it or makes sense. I wonder.
Made sense to me.
Okay.
We've got 2 more questions, and then we're at the hour mark, and I want to be respectful of your time.
Sweet.
So if there's any other questions, now's the time to throw them in. We'll try to get to them. Amelia asks, have you used any type of actionable metrics? Is this something you've considered?
I think that this is probably in relation to something like a Jester sale, where I said we had 80% people say this versus that. We have not. And the reason we've not is because the sample sizes have been so small. We've not yet put something out there for a mass audience that it's been experienced at scale on a device. And the day we do that, that can be a consideration. But for now, to keep it simple, it's just been, small festivals with sample sizes of a couple of hundred people, and we've not tried to like maintain or gather accurate data or anything.
That answer actually leads into Vito's question. Are you planning any projects that are more accessible, i.e. not on Magic Leap or HoloLens, things on tablets and phones? So I know the answer to that, but illuminate the audience.
I have liked working with Magic Leap and HoloLens, and we're working with the HoloLens 2 project right now, which is super exciting. We got a HoloLens 2 from Microsoft 3 weeks ago now, and it's really exciting to work with something brand new, and there's no GitHub or Stack Overflow responses about it, and you have to kind of do it all from scratch. And we really do enjoy that kind of work, and so we are still doing a lot of that. But yes, like it's really important to start reaching out to more people over time. Right now my priority is not to put something on the App Store that a lot of people can get to experience. My priority really is like finding a gap somewhere that we can truly fill and like satisfy. And so currently, for example, that's why the focus on education. With Terminal 3, we noticed that a few months ago when the new academic year started, I had a bunch of universities reach out to me asking if they could license Terminal 3 to show at their universities. So we made kind of a small licensing agreement, and we were charging like $2,000 or something as a licensing fee to allow them to show Terminal 3 at their universities. And the interesting thing is this was never part of the plan. There's no page, there's nothing online that's saying, oh, you can do this. People go out of the way, get in touch with me, find my contact, and want it because it applies so broadly to their work. Gets shown in game design, journalism, English literature departments. It just gets shown all over, right? So I'm starting to see that there's a lot of need for this kind of interactive content because it helps retain information more. It helps you pick and choose what you want to learn a bit better and creates this kind of engaging experience overall. So that's why our work is around exploring that and then deploying it really in the right places where people need it and it's going to work out. I don't want to be a person who puts out an experience that like a couple hundred people download and it never gets used or goes out there. If we're going to put something out one day, I would want it to be like thoroughly thought out and like find an audience, find a space. That's why I'm keeping our projects to ourselves and to limited festivals, circuits, and places that it could really be used in.
Dude, thank you so much for being generous with your time today. I really appreciate it. I guess we have like time for like one more question. If anybody has anything they want to ask, throw it in here. But if people want to keep in touch with Asad, I just sent his Kaleidoscope profile URL, so you can message him on Kaleidoscope directly. Are you going to be at First Look this year, Baltimore, in a month? Could we get you to come and give a talk or something? This is so great.
Sure. It's a thing. What dates is it?
5th, 6th, and 7th. It's Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
Okay. That could work. Let's talk about it in a while, as an off the line, and we can see if that, I would love. I mean, it's, as I told you earlier, there is a certain like homecoming feeling about First Look, so
we've got to find a way to get you there. And there's just so many cool artists that are going to be there that you'll want to hang out with. A lot of them on the line. So thank you everyone for tuning in for this first DevLab lecture. You really kicked us off well. The artists that are in the DevLab program, just a reminder that in 25 minutes we're going to be doing practice presentations. That it's not mandatory, so only come if you feel like you are ready and want some feedback. But if you do, I'll be there on the line at 10:30. Asad, great to see you, buddy.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me. This was really great. I can't believe there were 660 people.
And
it is, yeah.
Here is also the link for everybody to check out First Look as well in the chat log there. I'll leave it there. But anyways. Congrats on all the success, and we'll be in touch.
All right, man. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.